Well, there's a lot of humor in these poems. Do the amusing things just occur to you as you're working on the poem? Or do you look for things that might make you laugh?
I didn't look for them. They were there. They just popped up. And I wanted to let people know who read the book that this was not some stultifying, costume drama that I was writing about. But in fact, it was alive. The people had humor. They had, intrigues going on. And it was actually an incredibly evocative time.
We talked about you reading an excerpt. I actually had planned to bring it in when we were talking about Beethoven, but got up in the conversation so much. But would you read a little?
Sure.
Give us a taste. Rita Dove, her book Sonata Mulattica is published by Norton.
I'll read you an excerpt from a poem when Bridgetower is first meeting. He's about to meet Beethoven. He's at a musical salon. It's a party. And like cocktail parties today, there's all sorts of social drama going on. This is in Vienna. It's called First Contact, and Bridgetower is speaking. I hear he's a wild man, a proletarian who forgets to shave and rejects tutelage, who'll dare nobility to trespass wherever he decides to take his constitutionals. But at the keyboard, a wonder. So I am exactly where I need to be, tuning my instrument with Vienna's finest on a sun-blown April afternoon. I've made the rounds, baron to count to prince, had my letter of introduction passed on tray after tray like an after-dinner drink. It's all a bit dizzying, the lilting queries, coiffed heads bobbing in murmured goodwill. I watch late light soften the stucco into creamy arabesques as polite chatter swirls around me, whirls and dips, until I feel I'm being slowly stirred by a celestial coffee spoon.
Rita Dove reading from Sonata Mulattica, which was called Felicia R. Lee wrote in the New York Times in a piece last April. Rita Dove has now breathed life into the story of that virtuoso, George Augustus Polgreen Bridgetower. That's been your goal in a number of works. You received a Pulitzer Prize for your book of poems, Thomas and Beulah, which loosely told the story of your maternal grandparents. You're not writing the kinds of poems that we usually associate with poet laureates, like yesterday I was walking the fields kind of thing, or
well, and to me, I have been fascinated by the fact that we walk through an ordinary day, and that day and every impression that we have of it is somehow lost to history, and yet that's how we think of ourselves and breathe as human beings. So that has been one of my missions.
Well, do you see yourself as a historian in some sense?
Oh, gosh.
Because you're retelling the stories of people from the past.
A historian of the everyday, perhaps, but primarily as a poet. I think poets are, in a certain sense, historians. And even when you have a poem, I walked out and, into the sun, it is a history of that moment's impressions. So in that sense, perhaps, yes.
One of the poems in this book is in the form of a 3-scene play, and you change forms throughout the book.
I do. I felt that there are many voices in the book, and these voices all have their own cadences. Haydn was a little more formal, Beethoven's a little wilder, and so I had to change forms. When I got to the point where they had the confrontation over the girl, I really felt like I wanted to break out and do a farce, because farces were so important in Vienna at that time. They had fierce farces with political characters. All the people of the day came in and they ravaged them in those farces. And so I thought, why not? And so there's a play in the middle of the book.
In the last poem you write, do I care enough, George Augustus Bridgetower, to miss you? I don't even know if I really like you.
In the end, he was such a conflicted character. The book is immensely male-oriented. I mean, everybody's a male, and the women don't count. So that rubbed against me the wrong way, too. But he was not an angel. He was a brilliant player, but he also was a human being. And so that last poem is my kind of argument with him.
Now, when I hear the name Rita Dove, I think poet, but you've also written novels, short stories, drama. Mm-hmm. The usual question is, how do you decide what you want to do in what form? But also, Do you think of yourself as a poet first?
I think of myself as a poet first because I think everything comes out of the poetry, and it's where I love to be the most. But if an idea comes to me, I know what genre it's going to be in, and I can't explain why, but I do know that.
In this case, I'm sure that you were caught up in the whole idea of mixed race, which is always a concern. It's something that remains an issue within the black community, within the white community in this country, but must have been a really interesting concern in the late 18th, beginning of the 19th century.
Yes, and that was one of the things that drove me to write the book. I was curious to find out exactly how people regarded a mixed-race person, and it was radically different from what happens in this country, mainly because the slave trade was different there, and the demographics of London were different. There were less blacks, but it was fascinating. And to me, it's also really incredible that this mixed-race child could grow up and become a prodigy 200 years before Obama becomes president. There are so many parallels and echoes here.
It's also the cusp because his father, Bridgetower's father, was probably a slave at one point in his life.
He most likely was.
Rita Dove is the former U.S. Poet Laureate, the recipient of many honors, among them the Pulitzer Prize, the National Humanities Medal, the Heinz Award, the NAACP Great American Artist Award. She is Commonwealth Professor of English at the University of Virginia. And her latest book is, I can't say a book-length poem, but a bunch of poems, a collection of poems about one topic. And the title of all of those poems is Sonata Mulattica. It is published by Norton. Thank you so much for being with us.
It was my pleasure.